Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well, then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon Weinstein. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. I don't know about you, but when I started my career in accounting, one of the things that was explained to me very early on was the concept of lifestyle creep. And I didn't realize how prevalent this would be, not only in my life, but in businesses that I work with, including my own, where you make more money, you grow, right? But you end up not keeping as much of that in proportion to your sales. You tend to keep the same amount of money year after year, regardless of how much you make in sales. Let me explain. So, one of the biggest issues I see with scaling businesses is that they're eroding their margins down. And by margin, I mean your profit as a percentage of your sales. So hear me out. If you make, for the sake of simple numbers, you make $100,000 in a year in sales. If you retain 30,000 of that as profit, then you have a 30% margin. Okay. That's a net margin. At the end of all expenses, everything's been paid for, $30,000. That's a 30% margin. Okay. Now, if you the next year make $200,000, then if your margin is consistent and not eroding, then what would happen is you would make that 30%, but you would make a $60,000 profit because you made more in sales and then proportionately you kept more in profit in dollars, right? Doubled everything. Now, when I talk about margin erosion, I'm talking about too many business owners focusing on that number, that dollar sign, and not the percentage. So, what you might be doing is making $30,000 on 100,000 in year 1, and then the next year, you double your sales, but you still have 30,000 in profit. What happened? Well, you probably spent more money in order to make that new money, which is totally fine, but your margins are now down to 15%, not 30%, because now you're measuring 30,000 on 200. So now you're down to a 15% margin. And there's nothing wrong with that. These are just numbers. But I'm letting you know that that is one sign that your margins are eroding if the percentage of what you're keeping is really going down or the overall profit numbers remaining stagnant while your sales go up. Okay. Another warning sign that you might have margin erosion is that you're hiring at a faster rate than what you're bringing in for pipeline. So, this is particularly sensitive in marketing agencies, professional services, things like that, where you're going to have to hire in order to execute, in order to fulfill on contracts with your customers. So, this can get a little dicey because it's kind of this game of chicken and the egg on, do I hire somebody or do I wait for the pipeline to come in? It's a little bit of both. It's a delicate dance. But if you're hiring at a faster velocity than the clients that you're bringing in, then this could cause some heavy overhead and therefore some margin erosion. The other major culprit for margin erosion is customer acquisition cost. So when I talk about customer acquisition cost, hear me out. It's not just ad spend. This is what people a lot of the times think about is ad spend on, say, Meta ads or LinkedIn ads or whatever. So hear me out on this. When you talk about customer acquisition costs, I want you to actually lump together from your P&L everything that is associated with acquiring new clients, not running your back end of your business, not fulfilling on your customers, but actually dedicated to acquiring new clients. This could be events, travel, networking groups. This could be admission to certain places or, uh, entertainment even. Like, forget tax deductibility in this case, but in looking at your actual expenses of what you're spending money on, like how much are you spending to say run your podcast if that is a lead generation tool for you? How much are you spending on your email platform? How much are you spending on your social media manager? How much are you spending on all of these different initiatives, right? Your marketing team. So, in spending all of this money on marketing, how much are you actually extracting from that? And if your client acquisition cost, if your customer acquisition cost is not proportionately making sense to the amount of money that you're making where you're generating an ROI, then this is where your margin could be eroding as well. These are just some of the common culprits that we see based on, some of the root causes. If you have too much overhead in your system, you're a little bit bloated, then your sales aren't going to be able to outpace the amount of money you're spending. This is just a fact. This is like calories in, calories out. Like if you go to McDonald's every day, no amount of burpees is going to save you, right? Like at a certain point, you're going to accumulate into a calorie surplus, and the result is you gain weight. Same thing with if you're too heavy on the overhead front, you're not going to be able to move forward. Now, this could also be affected by your price. This could also be affected by your cost of goods. Like it's affected by everything. Your margin is basically the output or the byproduct of so many micro decisions that you make in your business. That is why it's so hard to crack the code, because kind of like your body, you know the symptom, but you, God, can't figure out like what the hell's wrong. Like, what is the root cause of this? Because I can treat it. If somebody could just tell me what the dang root cause was, like, is it my thyroid? Like, I blame everything on my thyroid. I'm like, oh, thyroid's acting up, right? It feels like, Mercury's in retrograde. Like, we try to blame the impact of what we're doing on other things because we don't know how to diagnose the root cause. We don't know how to treat it. And that's why we go to doctors, and that's why we go to specialists, and we go to coaches and everything to try to figure out what the hell's my problem. And I'm telling you, A, we can help you with that from a financial standpoint, first of all. But B, you're not alone and you're not wrong for thinking this. But what I'm trying to do with this podcast in general, and especially this episode, is to make you aware that there are ways to figure this out, and there are ways to pinpoint it and at least zoom in for you on the area that you should probably be working on. So, a big part of this is visibility and the fact that you should be really tuned into what your margins are for each of your services or products so that you know which items are the best sellers. Not only that, but the best profiters, right? How much are you actually retaining on each different offer? And how is that blend working for you in your overall numbers? That gets me into when you're diagnosing these margin erosions, you want to be looking at products and services, but also clients. Are you overextended on a client and you're actually losing money on them respective to your other clients? Or maybe you have some issues with some of the costs that are associated with delivering on your product or service. Like, do you have a really good grip on which of your costs are variable and which of your costs are fixed? So, when I say variable and fixed, I mean how much control you have and how much dependency those costs have on other activities. So, when I say variable, I mean, for example, variable cost would be quite literally like credit card fees or payment processing fees. The more you sell, the more those costs are, but they're proportionately similar versus, say, rent. Rent is just like a steady cost that you're going to have to pay no matter what to keep the business running. So, what is your rent? And then if you make more in sales, your rent doesn't go up, at least for most businesses. So, you have to be thinking about your fixed and variable costs.
Hey, real quick, are you learning anything in this episode that you think is share worthy? Well, if you could take a quick screenshot and share any of your biggest takeaways or quotes from this episode, post it to Instagram and make sure to tag me at Shannon K. Weinstein and at Keep What You Earn. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Let's dive back in.
And you also want to be looking at your compensation. This is a tough one because your compensation is a huge driver of margin, especially for my service businesses out there. Your compensation plan could make or break your margin. And you want to have a really good idea of how much to allocate to that. Now, do I have a rule of thumb on that? No, not really, because it will depend on your industry, it will depend on your business size and your maturity and your goals, honestly. Like what your ideal hire is, what your next hire looks like. That's going to be a huge factor. Okay. So, what can we actually do about this? Like, what can we actually do to improve margins so that we can scale without eroding them? So, first of all, you want to be looking at price increases. I know it's like the most uncomfortable thing. And it's like, oh, I know I need to raise my prices. Yes, you need to raise your prices, but also not just raise your prices, but maybe introduce a top tier, maybe introduce that service that you were going to start including in your offer. Maybe offer it as an upgrade bonus or offer it as a special, you know, a specially priced item or something that you could do in exchange for a review or something like that. Like maybe there's additional value you can offer, but you have to get some type of conditional value on it. Like stop giving away extra, extra, extra stuff without at least acknowledging that there's an extra value here. And then we also want to be looking at value based pricing models as opposed to, say, the billable time model. And you want to be looking at how much you're delivering in terms of value, not how much you're actually expending in terms of effort. I can't say that enough. I think you've heard me say that a bajillion times. And then we want to be looking at standardization. And by standardization, I don't mean that nothing can be bespoke, nothing can be customized. I mean, you want to have a rough idea in the standardized delivery of what you do. I use this analogy of Chipotle. Okay. So, Chipotle is a thriving business. We love Chipotle, right? Now, here's the thing. How standardized is Chipotle? Well, one would argue that the way that they operate is very, very standardized. Like, Shannon, how is this an example of like a hybrid of standardized and custom? Well, because when you go up to the line and you interact with the staff, they have a very standard way of operating. However, you still feel like every order is custom. You still feel like you can come back and order something different and they're still going to deliver on their promise to you and be in line with their brand and meet your expectations. Why? Because within the framework of standardization, they give you options. So they have a standard way of approaching delivering to a customer. However, they can slightly customize to the needs and taste of individual customers using their model. So if you want black beans or pinto beans, you have a choice. If you want a tortilla or a bowl, you have a choice. If you want chicken or steak, you have a choice. So much like that in our CFO service, we have a few things where we have a standardization of delivery of what we do for every client. But within that, we have certain focus areas or certain deliverables that we lean more into with certain clients and less with others. So we have a standardized approach, but we don't have to fit people into a cookie cutter. So introduce ways to create standardization, but not to the nth degree where there's diminishing returns, is my point. Now, reducing over customization of work and complexity. Stop pulling off, like taking the next exit off the highway and doing something totally different with a client. Like, stop creating new branches of your offers because clients want something slightly different. Here's the thing, you're the expert chef. Okay. If someone comes into your restaurant, you bet your butt I'm going to be ordering whatever is on the menu the way the chef has designed it. Who am I to add or remove anything unless there's like allergies or taste things, whatever? But I'm not going to go F around with the menu. I'm going to be like, no, this is how the chef intended to make it. So I'm going to eat it that way. And I want you to realize that your clients, your customers will trust you, that you are the expert, that you will craft the offer that will enable them to be the most successful. And therefore, you should be keeping everything to a standard level, but also reducing any extra customization that is going to deviate from your operating model. And of course, investing in certain automations. I do have a very conflicting view on automation. When overused, it can be detrimental. But I do think that you should be using a lot of automation and a lot of systems in place to enable that standardized delivery. And then, of course, you really want to be looking at your finances strategically and you want to have that visibility. So, if you're going to be recovering your margin as you scale, what you need to be doing is having constant oversight. Okay. I will tell you, I will sing it every single day till the cows come home. You need to be looking at your cash flow forecast every week. I do it every single Friday because I look at the timesheets of the week at the end of day on Friday. I run the payroll and then I do the cash flow for the following week. My biggest expense is payroll. So I look at what payroll is going to be for next week. I process it for the following week and I look at all of the expected cash flows coming out and the client revenue coming in and make sure everything is timed appropriately. And you know what I do after that? Go to sleep at night restfully because I know exactly what's going to happen. I know what credit cards are coming due. I know what payroll's coming due. And my business is one of the easiest to manage in terms of cash flow because of the predictability. But if your business is not predictable, if your business has a little bit of ebb and flow to sales, this is even more important. And I have a very predictable business and I'm doing this every week. I promise you, if you have anything less predictable than mine, you will benefit so greatly from this exercise. I'm not even kidding. The amount of, confidence that you'll have by looking at your cash flows is astounding. And I know we're talking about profitability on this episode, but what ultimately you need to be doing is having a really clear line of sight into where the money is going so that you understand how your profitability is being impacted. And you need to be looking at this stuff proactively. The last thing I'm going to mention is that you really should be standardizing also your dashboards or at least some type of reporting structure where you're reviewing your P&L at least monthly. So you should be getting your P&L, but you should be challenging that P&L. And I don't just mean challenging the bookkeeper on what they're doing, but I mean like If you look at your margins and you say, okay, my target margin is say 18%. And I look at the margins and I say, ooh, we hit 13%. I like to play around with, hmm, what could we have done differently? Or if we had gotten rid of some of these single, time investments, let's say I took a business trip that month and I said, well, if I didn't take the business trip, I would have hit it, then I would consider that a success because you have a few little spot expenses that might pop up here and there. But if your routine expenses are generating you a margin of roughly, below your, like, say 5 points, like 5% below your target, then you have some work to do to figure out, hey, where can we recover that? And how could we possibly regain margins so that for every dollar we're making, we're keeping a little bit more every time? And you know what that does? It allows you to pay yourself more, which is always the goal. So as you scale, as you grow, you have to maintain that profitability. And especially if you want to add enterprise value, eventually have an exit. This is one of those metrics that without a doubt a buyer is going to look at and look at how confident and how steady your margins can be. And that's only going to increase your multiple and increase your enterprise value.
As you think about growing and scaling your business, it's important to focus on how your operating costs align with your profit and personal goals. Are you allocating your resources wisely? Are your expenses supporting growth or are they holding you back? Building a sustainable and profitable business takes intentional budgeting and regular assessments of where your money's actually going. Now, with a power session, you can get personalized strategies to help your businesses thrive. Check out the show notes for more information on power sessions and how we can work with you to create the profit plan your business needs for a successful 2025.